The purpose of this video is to look at the differences between aerobic and anaerobic. We'll start off with aerobic. The word itself means with air, but the part that we're really looking at is oxygen. So this is going to be the process in our minds that happens with oxygen, whereas anaerobic is going to be the process that happens without oxygen. Just abbreviate that one as O2. The reason this is so important, when we're talking about respiration, most of the processes require oxygen. They require an aerobic environment. As far as the processes go that we've talked about so far, the two that are going to be aerobic are the Krebs cycle and ETC. The thing that we'll get into later this week is that glycolysis is actually anaerobic. The reason this is important is if you're exercising hard, your body can't keep up with the oxygen demand of your cells. This isn't a big deal if you're, say, like walking or doing a light jog, but if you're sprinting or doing something that really demands a lot of energy or a lot of ATP very, very quickly, that's where this can become a problem. You quickly pass over into an anaerobic zone. An easy way to tell with this is aerobic activity is something where you could carry on a conversation during the activity. If you think of aerobics, like aerobic exercise, the aerobic instructor is always up there in the front of the room talking to the people as they're going through the movements. They're encouraging them, come on, we have, 3 more, 2 more. If they can keep speaking while they're doing the exercise, then you know it's aerobic activity. No one's ever encouraging anybody during the 100-meter dash. At least none of the athletes are, none of the people that are running, because they're out of breath. They're tired, even the best athletes in the world. If you think about the Olympic athletes, if you ever watch, the summer games, the sprinting events, right after those events are over, they usually come up and the reporters are asking them questions. These guys are the best athletes in the world, and they're out of breath. And that's because your body just cannot keep up with the oxygen demand of your cells. The reason we're talking about this is if you end up in an anaerobic environment, these two processes stop working. Krebs cycle and ETC break down, your body ends up going into a different process, the process called fermentation. So that's going to be our last point that we put on here. Under a normal aerobic environment, you're undergoing respiration. But in an anaerobic environment, undergoing fermentation. Now for us, it's lactic acid fermentation. There are other kinds of fermentation that go on in like yeast and bacteria and things like that, which we'll get to when we're breaking down that process a little bit later on. But for now, just to know the main difference between these two is plenty. I used to give examples using Olympic athletes for this. I used to show like sprinting videos and things like that. I know that this guy you're about to watch isn't an Olympic athlete, but I think this will help to certainly get the point across. So as many of you probably already know, I compete in weightlifting, and weightlifting is a fantastic example of looking at the aerobic and anaerobic processes, because depending on how you're approaching weightlifting, it can be one of the two. Typically, something like powerlifting, which is what I compete in, where you're trying to lift, the most weight possible for a single rep, that's still aerobic exercise, because one rep generally won't drive you to such a point where you're out of breath. Typically, that's something that you can recover from. The problem is when you end up with doing like lots and lots and lots of reps, that's usually when you end up in an anaerobic environment. The variable we'll look at here is the amount of weight that's being moved. If you think about what we're talking about, when you have an anaerobic environment, your body can't keep up with the energy demand that you're placing on it. So maybe the energy demand will change as the weights get heavy. So we'll take a look at this first video and see what happens here. So this is me lifting 405 pounds in my basement just for one rep.
No problem.
So there's no problem. What I meant by no problem there is that I have no problem breathing, I have no issues with that, which means I'm still in an aerobic condition when it comes to the end of that set. So let's see what happens if we change things a little bit. What if we add a little bit of weight to it? So now if you're paying close attention, you'll see there's extra weight on there. There's an extra 25-pound plate. So now we're up to 455 pounds. Maybe this will now become more of an issue. Now I kind of goofed this one while I was editing it. I was going to come up and talk to the camera, and I ended up editing it out by accident when I was using the software on my computer. But you have to just take my word for it. I wasn't out of breath. I wasn't having any difficulty breathing or talking or anything like that after that set was over. There's one more heavier set just to sort of prove the point. So this was the heaviest one of the day. This is 500 pounds, so we'll see if this holds true no matter how heavy the weight is, if one rep is still enough just to keep you in that aerobic environment. So you can see, even with 500 pounds, still not out of breath, not breathing hard. That's because it's a quick burst of energy, so there's ATP stored in my cells that are allowing me to do this. It'll become a problem though if I try to do less weight for more reps. In case you were wondering, it is 500 pounds. There's 5 45-pound plates on either side. The bar is 45, and we got a little teeny tiny 2.5 on the side to make it even 500. Alright, so as you can see there, even with 500 pounds on the bar, I'm still in an aerobic environment because I have no issues speaking after that's over. My oxygen demand isn't high. I'm not out of breath. Nothing like that. So even though the energy demand there is high, it's very, very quick. The problem becomes once you have a high energy demand that's extended over a longer period of time. So we'll look at another example, something that's going to put me in an anaerobic environment. You'll certainly be able to tell the difference by the time the set is over. So here's our last one. Much less weight on the bar at this point. It's 365 pounds. At a weight like this, I can do many more reps. So in this set, the goal was to do 10, and we'll see how that changes things a little bit for the type of condition my body's in at the end. So now you'll see the difference. Even though it's far less weight, I was only 365 pounds, I can barely speak. Now I'm out of breath because my oxygen demand goes up. As your body's using ATP, it needs oxygen to keep the Krebs cycle and electron transport chain running. If it doesn't have enough oxygen, your body's demand goes up, and your respiration rate increases. Your breathing has to accelerate to keep up with that. So even though the previous weight was much heavier, this one is the one that's causing me to be out of breath because I did it for a set of 10. So whatever that took, like maybe 15 or 20 seconds, that's enough where your ATP is depleted and you end up being out of breath. So I hope this helps a little with aerobic and anaerobic. Thanks for watching. So just to recap a little bit, when your body's in an aerobic environment like we were talking about earlier, you have plenty of oxygen, you're not out of breath, you're not doing any kind of activity that's strenuous enough to make you out of breath, to make your body in a condition where it can't keep up with the oxygen demand from the Krebs cycle and from the electron transport chain. And an example like the video I just showed you, where I'm in an anaerobic environment, now all of a sudden you can see the difference. You can see that my respiration rate is high, my body's trying to recover as much oxygen from the air as possible to make up for that oxygen demand that's being placed on my cells. So the big thing here to remember is that glycolysis, the first part of the process of respiration, that will run regardless. That's working even here, even when I'm in this anaerobic environment. But when you're in this environment, Krebs cycle and electron transport chain both stop working. And this process of lactic acid fermentation takes over, which we'll get into a little bit tomorrow with the next video that you'll be watching. So I hope the examples were helpful. This one took me a little bit longer to make, but I think it's definitely worth it. So thank you for watching as always, and make sure you answer the questions after the video is over.